accidentally incorporate companies right after Liberland started, and we were wondering, for example, what happens if Liberland company invoices the Polish State University, and that was back like 6 years ago, and these experiments started, and to be honest with you, we actually never had any problem with it so far, and we never had anybody that had any kind of problem. And we were looking for more than 5 years to find a decent banking solution for them. And first we started to work with Bitwage, and that was a good solution where basically you could use it as a tool for banking, which is great because you jump directly from Bitcoin into banking, and then you also jump directly back from banking to Bitcoin. And they were having enough regulatory freedom so they could actually host Liberland companies. And that now is also, basically they have a new version of their system, Bitwage, if you ever heard about them. They're quite good. It's only like 2-3% that they're charging, and they allow you basically to pay in 30 minutes in places like Argentina with your Bitcoins into their banking system, and vice versa, because they have banking connections in some 30 countries around the world. And now we finally found a bank that is willing to work with Liberland companies, which is another great step forward to give more service to them, and it comes with the credit card, and it comes with now unlimited transfers. So that's pretty cool, and I hope that those initial months will prove that all these companies will be able to do the business. So, but anyway, Liberland companies have a large degree of freedom. There is a incorporation act that you can study how to incorporate company, and it also takes a couple of minutes, especially after you get e-residency, to start your company.
More questions?
So regarding Liberland, so what advantages do you think does Liberland have over, say, Liechtenstein, which also has good like things for companies?
As one joke, we had 4G like 2 years before Liechtenstein. 4G before Liechtenstein had like 2G, but we have all other advantages. I mean, like, one of the reasons why I started Liberland is that the market of getting citizenship in one of these countries is extremely difficult, right? Like, how many people is it in Liechtenstein a year?
30,000. No, 30,000 is the total, but it's just like a handful of new.
How many new a year?
Like it's, I think, single 2-digit number.
Yes, yeah. Yes, and I also wanted to basically upgrade. When I was thinking about it, like I would really like to upgrade from Czech citizenship to some other. And you know how difficult it is to get citizenship in Monaco, for example. There are 5 generations of Italians living in Monaco, and they still didn't get the citizenship. It's amazing. So I was thinking we really need to start a new country to be able to accept this new nation, which really the liberty-loving Bitcoiners in this new millennium are. And that's how I decided that, but we should also make it limited. But in a way, number of citizens in Liberland is not limited. We can actually give as many citizenship as we want, but the voting citizenships are really tied to the minimum amount of 5,000 meris that people have to accumulate in order to basically have a voting citizenship. And that's a standard way of getting citizenship. But if somebody really wants to become citizen, even before they accumulate 5,000 merits and they're somehow helpful to Liberland, we are able to give, for example, the spouse of Liberland also Liberland citizenship, but it doesn't come with the 5,000 merits that is necessary to basically maintain the master node on the network. But I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Oh, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. So it's more about like being accessible to outsiders. One quick question for Vlad: what does TKVR stand for?
Takeover.
Okay.
I actually have a question about Liberland. So if you don't live in Liberland, as most citizens do, can you actually become an ambassador and get one of these ambassador passports, like a diplomat?
Of course, as long as you work like serious ambassador and you have some capability to expand our diplomatic relations, we give you the passport, diplomatic passport. We have basically now. Not really, no. Actually, it's not that simple. Actually, I mean, and it doesn't work with other countries as well. So we have Vienna conventions about using diplomatic immunity, and in order to actually be recognized as a diplomat in a country, you have to be accredited by the country, right? So even people basically running around with Czech Republic diplomatic passport in Germany, unless they are accredited by Germany, they don't really have the full diplomatic status in that country, even though they have some level of protection. But of course, it works great with the queues on the airports. That helped me. I think it saved me at least 10 hours of my life. And it's also great with visas in Africa, because there are like $100 visa requirements in Africa if you're traveling for tourists, but you're not tourists. So I sometimes use it for that, even though I probably shouldn't. But the main reason why we have the passports is it would be really silly if you start a new country to travel on Czech passport, for example, to El Salvador, and have a diplomatic talks with the government there on some other than Liberland passport, right? So it's, for us, it's a must, and we have some 300 diplomatic passports now within our diplomatic community distributed, and roughly 1,200 regular passports right now. There is a mid-term or like short-term task is to launch successfully this governance, which will really manifest the things that we wanted to achieve with our constitution. So we're basically launching Liberland Congress. There will be 21 people that will be elected by merit holders, and we are distributing the governance of Liberland basically from me and couple ministers to regular body, which is actually a requirement for recognition by many countries. Like, you cannot really get recognized unless you have an elected body, which we're going to have. So for me, now getting this right, and also actually properly market it and get it technologically set up correctly is very important. And the other thing is settlement, and this festival that we have on 13th of August, there is this conference, and basically we're putting more and more people closer and closer to Liberland over the time. So that's another critical thing which must be properly managed, and it ties together with the relations with Croatia, which must be improved. We're going to put, right after this governance will be set up, we will put much more resources into relations with Croatia. We will probably keep on our pushing for recognition with other countries globally, but our presence in Croatia will be much stronger. Now we're a little bit disbalanced, like most of the investments are coming to Serbia, but actually Croatia is joining Schengen fully. So that will make it very difficult for them to prevent us from making investments around Liberland and actually visiting Liberland from Croatia, etc. And it's coming on the 1st of January next year. So we have a great opportunity to utilize this, that they are finally entering Schengen in our advantage.
So when you die, who takes over, and how does that pass on? How do you pass things on? Or have you not thought about this?
You know, so active management of Liberland is vested into Congress. So those are the people that were elected by merit holders, and merit holders are the people that pay taxes in Liberland. But the reserves of those merits that are automatically being distributed to Congress is at custody of Senate. And that is something like House of Lords in Liberland. It doesn't have active decision-making power, but it holds the custody of the reserves, and it does keep a veto power. For quite a long time, it will keep veto power like a second chamber. So I myself, for example, didn't give myself any merits for starting Liberland so far. Maybe I will probably also give myself some merits for it. But I'm keeping like the custodial role of the Senate, and that Senate is inheritary, but it is inheritary just like the merits are in Congress, but we've got like a two-corporate structure for Liberland.
Just one more question. So are there any surprising statistics or negative things that you didn't expect to happen when Liberland was started? Any bad things that surprised you and that you did not expect?
Really, you know, I'm quite happy to be alive, and surprisingly nobody has threatened my life since we started Liberland. So it is, I would say, very peaceful country creation, unlike many countries are. And and I have to tell you that things are actually going very much in line what we wanted to. Of course, sometimes I wish they were faster. But I probably didn't answer your question fully. So the new president, if you're thinking about that, we actually wanted to remove the position completely originally, and just keep the powers vested with the Congress. But then we thought that it actually would kind of break the, the tradition in Liberland. Yeah. So new president will be voted by senators, basically. It's just to answer your question, how it is structured according to the constitution.
How we can buy the merits and what is the price?
It's you basically donate to Liberland right now. So it's it's not, and it will be created once the whole blockchain governance will be finished, and that we are. The testnet is running for 2 months already, so we're quite close to doing that. But I want to make at least 2 more security audits before we launch it, and right now everything, all the money that came to Liberland were simply donations, but we're gonna exchange them basically for these tokens, and then the market will decide about the value. Of course, it can go up, it can go down, but we're basically giving the share of Liberland some value, and the share of Liberland does represent a share inside of the sovereignty of Liberland and everything that Liberland owns right now.
So my question is for Vlad. Would you like the magazine to remain a one-man show, or are you looking for contributors in the future?
That's a very good question, and I very much welcome contributors if they can write stuff, but at the same time I'm not in a position where I can hire people to work, and I hate asking people to work for free. So that's why I keep it a bit quiet from this point of view, because I'm not sure if I can reward them to the extent that they would be happy. And I know that the market has gone quite crazy in the content production and paying field, because it used to be like $100 per article when I was working for Bitcoin Magazine. Now people ask for $250, and that's only for a short one. If they want something which is well researched, and the stuff that I do, I would have to pay someone else like at least $1,000 to write it. And I'm not sure if they were comfortable to have it open sourced. They would like to retain their copyright, whatever. So it's delicate, but if I find someone with the right mindset and technical understanding of how Bitcoin works, I would love to work. Actually, that would help me, do less of the work that I already do. So that would be super convenient.
And your plan is to issue 1 magazine every year?
That's reasonable because it gives me enough time to promote it at various conferences. And it gives me enough time to deliver like 500 to 1,000 copies by myself every year, which is not much if you think at scale, but just think about the fact that I pick each copy by myself. I walk up the stairs to the 4th floor where I live. I sign it, I put it in an envelope, I take it to the post office. There's a lot of work there.
Yeah, I love it. It's a great project.
I have a question for Rahim. I don't want him to feel like he was only here for the pictures. Because I always criticize the fact that we look like cults, and the fact that we don't really stick to the problems that Bitcoin really fixes and generalize to the point where we say Bitcoin fixes everything and better money will fix human flaws that are inherently human. And where do you think is the tipping point where we're going to look less cultish and we're going to really rationalize what Bitcoin is?
Yeah, I think one shouldn't worry too much about how we look, because that's again the whole collective premise, which is wrong from the start. And of course you can't avoid that one of the reasons to be interested in this project is dissatisfaction with society as it is, and that's as a natural tendency for this cultish way, which I think is not worse than the scammy way. So this perception, it's quite hard to control, and I think that different personalities with different strategies as well in communication, that may work out. So the only way to get past that, if you reach a certain scale, because then you have a greater diversity of people being interested in it, and that's why I think generally a focus on both sides is interesting, is trying to figure out who are the people you align with, but then be less preachy to the outside, but get your refuge. So it's better to like go to your Bitcoin Citadel and try to play it out rather than being self-righteous and just trying to preach to the masses, which I would call the guru, and that of course has the bad perception, and rightly so. I think people who in their private life do whatever cultish things, I think that's okay, and that most people tolerate if it doesn't affect you and if it's not preachy and just going your way, because you'd usually expect them to fail and then tell them, oh, I told you so. So I think that's generally fine. I think it's a mix up. And on the other side, I think the focus on tools, which are neutral tools, really helping people with real use cases. I think this was also one of the drivers behind the adoption of Bitcoin. That's a very natural phenomenon of its increasing adoption, that it will look less cultish because it has a higher diversity and it's people with needs that are aligned along those needs. And that's how usually something from being a kind of cultural innovation turns out to be a technological innovation. It's not the discovery of something that's very new, it's the innovation of more and more people realizing that it's a means to their ends, even if we don't have the same ends, but we can use the same means for different ends. So I wouldn't be too much worried about perception. I think it's great, and listen to part of your talk, how you see, I mean, yourself standing out and how you communicate. I think it's a trade-off, of course. It's your strategy. I think it's great that diverses the amount of voices, and generally I think that's probably the best you can do, and that will be the change that you want to see. How can you bring or explain Bitcoin to people without coming along as too cultish? And I think you're right, is not having the agenda, is not having the agenda first, but being empathical about what are your problems and how could that be a fix for your problems, and trying to get a deeper understanding.
Let me just make a small comment about your speech, if you don't mind. You know, like you said that we shouldn't label things, and then I felt like you labeled everybody, potentially everybody that you were talking about. I would just be, you know, like very careful about self-labeling. You know, even like labeling Bitcoiners as a cult. I think it's simply not true. Like, we're living in this great era when Bitcoin has really taken form of the 7th biggest currency in the world, or maybe now 8th after a bit of a fall. And I think it's really great to be excited about something, you know, and if you're part of the group, it makes it even more exciting. So I'm not in favor of like labeling, especially ourselves, like Bitcoiners, as a cult or something. You know, and that's my notes.
Yeah, no, that would be a misunderstanding. I said don't use the term Bitcoin at all. But then, of course, you do use labels as phenomena, and I use two labels that I think are, I mean, they've caught on a bit because they express something, and those are memes, if you like. It's not real things, it's memes. It's like there's some kind of alignment of understanding. You know, people see it and they see something expressed, either something they dislike or the like, and I try to explain why do some people dislike those things, what's the reason behind that, and I try to differentiate the phenomena. And that's the approach, I think, of this Austrian tradition. I mean, you go heads on. It's not just you try to conceal it with better words and try to find better labels because you have an agenda, because you want to make it more acceptable or so on. It's better to be outspoken and direct, and even call a scammer and the cultist, but still have the empathy and figuring out, okay, why does it look that way, and what's in the context that you can understand, and then probably learn from it, and not repeat every time the same mistakes, because you got to repeat them on your own. So I think it's crucially important to be very critical and look at every project very critical. In particular, those projects that seem too good to be true, that seem to be very innovative. So yeah, I think it would be better to be more critical than less critical, even though it may seem a kind of negativity.
Let me just quote, you know, I don't know if you know Mr. Jager, the guy that won like everything in NHL. He said, if you cannot say something nice, you better shut up. But I'm just like, you know, like contra opinion in this regard. But I'm trying to.
It's also a different culture. I mean, it's a bit of a mentality difference as well. I know, I mean, this realist approach, it seems sometimes overly negative, and I tried to explain why it's not that. Usually the American mentality is a bit different, is you focus on the positive and the niceness and be nice. And of course, I mean, I enjoy that mentality as well. It's nothing better, but it's just different mentality. And I'm part of different culture and mentality, and I think there's value in that kind of critical rationality. If you can figure out that even if you're quite harsh with your terms, and that's why I always trigger warnings, if you like, you still, I mean, person to person, you can be empathical, but everything that has like a public outreach, just be aware that there are traps. And I think generally, even with entrepreneurial projects, my preferred tendency is the via negative, as the selection. It's like you need to bring up lots of ideas because you want to destroy most of them. I'm not sure, I'm not claiming it's the only way and it's the best way. I tend to see value in that. Rather come up with more ideas and destroy more ideas than just pick one and say, okay, but it's got to work, it's got to be that one, and shut out all the criticism and potential problems. Yeah, but I totally understand your point that it may seem less civil, less nice, a bit toxic at times. That's quite okay, just accept it's a different mentality potentially. And then, of course, you're involved with a project, maybe involved with projects, of course, there may be a bias as well.
I just want to add that it's actually useful for the Bitcoin project at large for us to disagree. As if we all agree on something, it's going to become centralized around some idea. And even if that idea turns out to be good, someone might come up with a different idea. And if we have a culture of agreeing with each other, it's going to be easier to get across and make changes. So having different ideas about what it is and competing all the time, it's what keeps the project successful and only ends up having the best of ideas getting implemented.
I completely agree. I think it's a great conclusion to go to lunch.
So one question for Rahim. So like regarding the Bitcoin Citadel. So Bitcoin is for transferring value between people who like don't really know each other. But if you have a like Citadel, like a tight-knit cult, then you can basically just keep a tab in order to like transfer value between each other. So now I'm like, isn't like the Citadel kind of like the Bitcoin cult kind of isn't it like a mismatch to the technology? And one thing that I think is a better approach is like the like network state. I'm not sure if you heard of that. Yeah, maybe you can contrast.
I even mentioned Balaji, as he termed this society as a service analogy. I'm not so sure. The network state is more like a blockchain experiment, and I think there's a higher rate of failure with that and a higher risk for scams. Then with even if the Bitcoin Citadel, I totally agree, it's like a logical contradiction because money is the neutral thing. It's for cooperation between foreigners and not a tribal thing. Nonetheless, the reason for Bitcoin may be as much in the context as in the technology. That's why in the origin block, of course, is a reference as well to the time that it gets started. So there's a reason, and without these distortions, we don't know if Bitcoin would ever have picked up or if it's just a fancy thing that there's no real use case for because everyone is happy with the fiat currencies. No, I think it's a sound conclusion to see a moral problem of money. And of course, not without being just judgmental, but I think we are moral beings, so we try to find out what's the right thing to do, and we see not only economic distortions. I think there's a reason to see moral distortions in society as we're looking at, and I think we have agreed that it's part of the motivation, it's part of the why. So the how is not that important as the why. And of course, in particular here, because we are privileged, so we don't have all these house that other people may need. Most have bank accounts, fintechs, credit cards, and the payment thing is more or less solved for most people with their Apple wallets and so on. So this kind of how that's first addressed by Bitcoin, I'd say, is kind of border crossing payments, fairly easy, fairly quick, compared to, of course, a Western Union stuff or the other alternatives in less privileged countries. There's more obvious. I think within the Western hemisphere, the why is more important because the how is not really there yet. And in the sense that it's for a majority of people really the more convenient way to use money, because they still haven't figured out that really the problem of money isn't just the coins or bills. That's a tiny proportion. The problem is really monetary assets, mainly real estate here, and there are really existential problems linked to that one. And of course that reflects also the structure of our societies and the way you live and the problems you face and the moral dilemmas you face and so on. So I think there's nothing unsound about seeing it as a moral cause, and if you see it as a moral cause, the better way is to align with people with the same values rather than trying to convert other people to your values. Just show other people that there's a way to live according to your better values and it'll have a better impact, and that's the intentional community. And it may sound paradoxical that in a Bitcoin Citadel, Bitcoin may not be used that much or not at all. So I totally agree, but that's the way it is, and I don't think that it shows that those are idiots who try to live there. They just a bit maybe figure out what it's really they are trying to seek in order to avoid disappointments, and the worst thing, avoid affinity scams, which is like someone providing a cult as a service, more or less, and that's the most dangerous, I think, intersection. Affinity scams means you claim that you represent the same values, so we are all brothers because we are all like libertarians or whatever, or Bitcoiners or Maxis, and then you offer it as a service basically, and you offer a worse value or higher price because you take advantage of this affinity, of this trust that you consume and abuse. So just a warning to be aware of what it is and what it may be. And it's not related to the monetary problem directly, but indirectly, as the distorted monetary order. I think there are some reasons for the kind of moral distortions people see and the problems of living their life or figuring out a better way to live. And I think it's reasonable to see a kind of overlap between those problems. I don't think that better money will fix everything because it's still human nature. But I think a better money would go a long way in fixing a lot of the issues which are really symptoms of this distorted monetary structure.